Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and emotionally unstable acrobats on the brink of collapse, welcome back to my life, where the circus is on fire, the clowns are fanning the flames, and I'm just here with a bucket of sarcasm and broken dreams. It all started on a Tuesday, which is statistically the most soul-crushing day of the week. You don't expect anyone to be cheerful on a Tuesday, but I also didn't expect my trapeze artist to be curled up in the corner of the big top, hugging a crash mat and whispering motivational quotes like a broken podcast. Loopy was not okay. And by not okay, I mean he was mentally dangling from a rope far more fragile than the one he swings from nightly. He'd been volunteering for every task lately. Ticket booth, popcorn machine, restocking the glitter cannon, all while training for his solo triple twist finale that literally no one asked for. I asked him why he was doing all this. He stared me dead in the eye and said, "If I don't do it, who will?" That's the moment I should have called a therapist. Instead, I called a meeting. But Loopy didn't show up to the meeting. I found him instead rehearsing in an empty tent at 6 a.m., doing aerial stretches and muttering, "You are the show. You are the spectacle. You are productivity incarnate." It was like watching a Burnout TED Talk hosted by a sleep-deprived hummingbird. Of course, in true circus fashion, things got worse the moment Kazzam walked in. Now, in case you've been blissfully unaware, Kazzam is our magician. And I use that term loosely. He's more of a walking YouTube tutorial with a wand he found in the clearance bin at a Halloween store. His last trick involved disappearing a rabbit and accidentally deleting my calendar. I haven't forgiven him. Anyway, Kazzam bursts in with the energy of a man who definitely drank soda labeled experimental batch. He's waving around a thumb drive and yelling something about a breakthrough. And by breakthrough, I mean he bought an advanced hypnotherapy program from a man named Psychic Steve who records videos in a van behind a tire shop. He claimed it was cutting edge. I asked if that meant it came with a blade. Loopy, in his foggy, overworked days, was just desperate enough to go along with it. He looked up from his motivational mat nest and said, "If it'll help me reset, I'll try anything." That's when I should have stepped in. Instead, I blanked, and by the time I opened my eyes, Kazzam had already set up a beanbag chair, a lava lamp, and a Bluetooth speaker playing whale noises at full volume. I backed away slowly. I didn't know what was more dangerous, Loopy's willingness to surrender his brain to YouTube therapy, or Kazzam's confidence in a diploma he printed off a PDF with Comic Sans. And then it happened. Kazzam pressed play. Loopy sat down. A voice began counting backwards from 10, speaking in that overly calm tone that screams, "This is going to go very wrong." At first, it seemed harmless. Loopy's eyes glazed over, his breathing slowed. Kazzam gave me a smug look like he just fixed mental health. That lasted 2 minutes. Suddenly, Loopy started twitching, whispering. His lips moved, but no words came out. His eyes rolled back, and I swear on my last functioning spotlight, he started crying mid-air gesture, as if reliving a trauma in real time. I asked Kazzam what step we were on. He said, "Oh, I skipped ahead to the regression module. I thought it would go faster." Regression. This lunatic skipped the basic relaxation and jumped straight to relive your worst failures like we're running speed therapy on a budget. And Loopy was now mumbling something about the spotlight. It never turned on. I dropped the bar. Everyone saw. He was back in the memory of the night his hand slipped in the big finale 3 months ago. The one where the spotlight did fail. The one where we had to pause the show and pretend it was part of the act. The one where he stopped smiling for 2 weeks. I should have pulled the plug. Instead, I stood there frozen, watching this therapy session turn into a seance with Kazzam still waving his wand like it meant something. And then Loopy's eyes snapped open. He stared straight ahead and said, "I know what I must do." Kazzam looked delighted. I looked for the exit. Because if there's one thing worse than a burnt-out trapeze artist, it's a hypnotized one with a mission.
Now you might think the correct response to, "I know what I must do," is a calm professional inquiry like, "And what's that, Loopy?" I did not do that. I said, "Oh no!" Because when someone stares off into the void like they're about to storm a battlefield and they're wearing a sequined leotard, you don't ask questions, you brace for consequences. Loopy stood up, still fully under the effects of Kazzam's knockoff hypnotherapy, and announced to no one in particular, "I must perfect the fall." Perfect the fall. He wasn't even speaking like himself anymore. He sounded like a motivational poster possessed by the ghost of every unpaid intern who ever tried too hard. I turned to Kazzam and asked what the hell he'd done. Kazzam, completely unfazed, just smiled and said, "He's unlocking core memories. It's beautiful." Beautiful? My trapeze artist was about to reenact the worst moment of his career and possibly throw himself off something again? This wasn't therapy, it was trauma speedrunning. And yet Kazzam had the audacity to act like he just invented enlightenment. He pulled out a second thumb drive labeled Advanced Affirmations, Volume 2, Confidence Through Chaos, and said, "We can go deeper." Deeper? The man wanted to double down, like this was a jacuzzi and not a psychological minefield. I was about to confiscate every USB device within 5-mile radius when we heard a thunk above us. Loopy had climbed the ladder to the high rig. Now, let me be clear, the show was not scheduled, the tent was empty, there were no mats laid out. And yet there he was, 30 feet in the air, arms stretched wide, eyes glazed over like a baked potato with a death wish. He shouted, "The fall must be mastered. I must become the fall." At this point, I was done negotiating with reality. I shouted up, "Loopy, this is not a healthy coping mechanism." Kazzam, of course, didn't help. He clapped. He actually clapped and said, "That's the spirit of resilience." I considered pushing Kazzam off something. Hypothetically. Legally, I didn't. Then Loopy left. No warning, no countdown, just launch. And for one terrifying suspended moment, it looked like he was doing it, like somehow this manic spiral was working. He twisted midair, flipped, and missed the bar completely. Not that he was aiming for it. He landed on a rope net half set up from last week's act. Not designed for catching people. Certainly not Loopy-sized people. But by some miracle, or possibly sheer circus guilt, the net held. Loopy lay there, eyes wide, whispering, "I failed again." Kazzam, still convinced he was a licensed professional, leaned over and said, "No, Loopy, you succeeded in letting go." Letting go? He almost let go of his spine. At this point, I was ready to call animal control, even though we weren't dealing with animals, because clearly human behavior had left the chat. Loopy got up, disoriented, and walked straight toward the audience seats like he was in a different show entirely. Sat down, folded his arms. Again, we go again. Kazzam gave me a thumbs up, I gave him the finger. Because here's the thing about burnout. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, more. More effort, more perfection, more rope, more chances to fall harder the next time. And now Loopy was stuck in a hypnosis loop, reliving the trauma like a rerun of his worst episode, while Kazzam stood by like some spiritual life coach from the deepest corners of Wi-Fi hell. I wanted to stop the madness, but I couldn't. Because Loopy wasn't listening to me. He was listening to the voice in his head, Kazzam's voice. Or maybe his own self-doubt echoing through cheap affirmations and flashy magic. He believed this was the path to healing. And Kazzam? Kazzam was already prepping a new spell called Mind Cleanse, delete emotional baggage. This was going to get worse.
I should have called a professional. I should have unplugged the Bluetooth speaker, tackled the magician, and called every therapist within a 50-mile radius who doesn't list crystals as a medical credential. Instead, I made a PowerPoint. Look, in my defense, I thought maybe, just maybe, what Loopy needed was structure, a hard reset, a good old-fashioned return to basics. So I printed out his original training schedule, dug up his old performance reviews, all written in glitter pen by Muffy, and created a program called Operation Ground Control. I even had a tagline, reconnect with the real you before the burnout and brainwashing. The plan was simple, reintroduce Loopy to what made him love the trapeze in the first place. No expectations, no pressure, just light stretching, rope swings, and zero magic. Spoiler, it failed. because nothing screams relaxing reintroduction to joy like Gribbs standing in front of a whiteboard with a marker and bullet points. The first thing I wrote was, Step 1, you are not a product. Loopy stared at it like it was written in Klingon. He looked me dead in the soul and said, but I am the show. And just like that, I knew we were screwed. Still, I pushed forward. I brought out his favorite safety harness, the one with the little gold stars he insisted gave him aura balance. I hung up the old banner from his first solo performance. I even turned on the disco light that Kazzam accidentally hexed into only flashing red and blue, hoping it'd trigger some good memories. Loopy stepped up to the platform and froze. His fingers twitched. His breath got shallow. He looked down, not at the net, but at the invisible expectation bar he'd mentally set 30 feet above the tent. Then he whispered, what if I don't remember how? That's when I realized this wasn't about performance. This was about identity. Loopy didn't just love the trapeze, he was the trapeze. Without it, he had no idea who he was, and with it, he felt like he was drowning in his own high expectations. So, I did what any emotionally bankrupt circus manager would do. I lied. I said, don't worry, we're not going to do the full jump today, just some low swing warm-ups. He nodded, barely, but it was enough. He grabbed the bar, took a breath, and Kazzam reappeared. I swear, this man has an internal radar for ruining moments of clarity. He burst in wearing a cape that looked suspiciously like a shower curtain and yelled, behold, hypno-recalibration phase 2. Before I could tackle him, and believe me, I considered it, he pulled out what he called a mental cleanse candle. It was made from melted crayon wax and smelled like expired ginger. He lit it. Loopy gagged. He started coughing uncontrollably, fell off the platform, thankfully onto the mat this time, and curled into a fetal position. I turned to Kazzam and said, what part of mental clarity involves choking on whatever that was? He replied, dead serious, the flame unlocks emotional congestion. Emotional congestion. I wanted to emotionally congest his candle up his nose. Loopy was now full spiral again. Eyes wide, chest heaving, muttering, I failed the warm-up, I can't even swing, I'm a fraud, I'm a fraud. So much for Operation Ground Control. Kazzam tried to play it off like this was a natural stage of the cleansing process. I told him he was banned from stage names, stages, and candles for the rest of the fiscal year. But damage done. Loopy had regressed. He refused to get off the mat, said he was staying there until the air stopped judging him, which, considering this is a circus tent, might take a while. I tried reasoning with him, reminded him he's human, that taking a break isn't failure, that we all crash eventually. Loopy stared up at the ceiling and said, even gravity is disappointed in me. And that's when I gave up on the plan. The whiteboard got flipped, the glitter pens went back in the drawer, because you can't PowerPoint your way out of burnout. And definitely not when there's a magician lighting crayons on fire next to you.
Let me tell you something about the circus. When one person burns out, it spreads faster than glitter in a fan factory. And when that burnout is airborne trapeze-shaped, everyone else thinks it's contagious. It started with Gorka. She walked in mid-crisis, mid-flex, mid-bite of a protein bar labeled "No Excuses," saw Loopy curled up in a mat burrito, and immediately took it as a personal attack. She stormed up and shouted, at me, not at him, why is the aerial unit offline? Like we're a damn military operation and not a tent full of tax write-offs. I tried to explain, calmly, with words. She didn't hear them. Instead, she snapped into motivational overload mode, which is what happens when she smells weakness and decides to fix it by yelling louder than the problem. She grabbed a resistance band and tossed it at Loopy's feet like it was a lifeline, said something about pain being weakness leaving the body. Loopy didn't move. She turned to me and said, he needs to toughen up. Let me coach him. To which I replied, unless your coaching license includes trauma-informed care, maybe don't. And that's when it spiraled. Kazzam, who had apparently been lurking behind the cotton candy machine with another USB drive, because of course he was, stepped in and said, actually, he's in a state of regression and mustn't be interrupted. Gorka stared at him like he just suggested yoga to a chainsaw. She said, regression? You want him to relax his way out of a breakdown? This is the circus. We push through, we adapt, we do. Kazzam smiled with the confidence of a man who's never once succeeded at anything and replied, or we surrender to the healing ether and allow the subconscious to recalibrate. I watched it happen in real time. Gorka's brain short-circuited. She physically twitched from the force of her disagreement. Then she said, and I quote, "You want him to recalibrate? I'll recalibrate him with a kettlebell to the chakras." Now, I'm not one to defend Kazzam, ever, but I also don't need to add bludgeoned magician to our incident report log again. So I stepped in between them. That's when Loopy spoke up, still on the mat, still wrapped like a sad human sushi roll, and whispered, "Why are you fighting? This is my fault." That shut them both up. He looked up at us with those glassy, burnout eyes and said, "I broke the act. I'm the weak link. I ruined the show." And Gorka, bless her protein-powered heart, did something unexpected. She softened. She crouched next to him, placed one massive hand on his shoulder, and said, "You didn't ruin anything. The tent's still standing." Which, to be fair, was a low bar for success, but it meant something coming from her. Then, of course, Kazzam had to ruin it. He stepped forward and said, "This is good, very good. Group energy is aligning. Let's try shared visualization." He held out a rubber crystal he'd clearly painted 5 minutes ago and said, "Everyone focus your third eye." Gorka stared at him. Then she stared at the crystal. Then she threw it across the tent. It shattered against the popcorn machine and a puff of pink smoke came out. No one said a word. We all just watched the smoke linger like disappointment. Loopy said, "Was that supposed to happen?" Kazzam whispered, "It was symbolic." Gorka growled, "It was stupid." I muttered, "It's a Tuesday." At this point, the tension was thick enough to cut with a juggling knife. Everyone had a different idea of how to help Loopy, but none of us had the one thing that actually mattered. Rest. Real rest. The kind you don't earn through performance. The kind you don't have to justify with glitter or magic or squats. And here's the kicker. No one wanted to admit they were burned out too. Gorka, she's been training through 3 pulled muscles and a mild concussion she calls a spicy nap. Kazzam, he hasn't taken a day off since his rabbit unionized. Me, I'm emotionally duct taping this place together with sarcasm and expired snacks. Loopy was just the first one to break, but we're all cracked. And now we're all snapping at each other in a big colorful tent that smells like burnt glitter and broken dreams. And still, no one has stopped the show. Because we don't stop. We perform. We pretend. Even when the net's not there.
Just when I thought we reached emotional rock bottom, the universe brought a shovel. It started with the drums. Our sound technician, who apparently got their degree from Just Wing It University, accidentally triggered the pre-show playlist, which meant that while Loopy was mid-meltdown, Gorka was mid-stare-down with Kazzam, and I was mid-regret of life choices, the tent suddenly exploded with circus fanfare. The worst kind. The kind with cymbals and kazoo harmonies. Before I could scream, "Cut the music!" the front flap opened and in came the audience. Not a few curious walk-ins. No, a full tour group. They were early. Apparently, their bus driver was making great time, which is code for, we now have 47 senior citizens looking for a distraction before bingo. And there we were. One trapezist broken, one magician delusional, one strong woman vibrating with rage, and me smiling like a hostage in customer service. The tour guide turned to me and said, "Oh, perfect, a behind-the-scenes look. How immersive." Yes, immersive, because nothing screams professional experience like backstage emotional collapse. Loopy, bless his confused little brain, sat up from the mat and whispered, "Are we performing?" I panicked. I said, Nope, not a show, just a live therapeutic rehearsal demo." Kazzam took that as a cue. He bowed deeply, nearly tripping over a coil of rope, and said, "Welcome to the soul's grand unveiling. Please hold your applause until the ego has dissolved." The seniors clapped anyway. Gorka growled. Then, because this tent is cursed, one of the guests yelled, "Do a flip!" And Loopy stood up. His body said don't move, but his burnout brain said must perform or lose identity. He
He turned to the platform. He turned to me. He said, "One last chance. I'll get it right this time." And before I could stop him, he was climbing. No safety checks, no spotter, no plan. Just trauma on autopilot heading toward altitude. I shouted, "Loopy, stop! This is not a show!" But the seniors were already filming. Phones out, tripods up, probably posting to whatever version of TikTok exists in retirement homes. And Loopy was midair again. This time he wasn't flipping. He was falling. On purpose. Arms outstretched, eyes open wide, like he wanted to hit bottom just to prove he could bounce back from it. I reached for the emergency net lever and it jammed. Kazzam naturally shouted, "I can fix it," and pulled out what he claimed was a reverse levitation spell. It looked like a tennis ball with glitter glued to it. He tossed it in the air and yelled, "Suspend!" Nothing happened. Gorka, meanwhile, sprinted toward the center of the ring, arms out like she was planning to catch Loopy herself. I yelled, "Gorka, no! Physics!" She yelled back, "I am physics!" And then, a miracle? No, a crash. Loopy slammed into the not quite assembled foam pit we were supposed to test next week. It absorbed just enough impact to not kill him, but not enough to make it graceful. He popped up, dazed, with a piece of foam stuck to his cheek and said, "Did it work?" Kazzam ran over, beaming like a lunatic. "You faced your fall! You conquered it! You are reborn!" Loopy blinked, then collapsed again, whispering, "I can't feel my legs." He could, for the record. He just didn't want to. The tour group applauded. One lady said, "Very modern, very post-traumatic avant-garde." I considered biting through my own tongue, because now I had one unconscious trapezist bodice with a foam pillow for a helmet, one magician preparing the next spell with something that smelled like cheese, one strong woman screaming at the audience to respect the mat, and 47 retirees giving this disaster a 5-star review on Yelp. It got worse when the announcer, who missed the memo entirely, got on the mic and declared, "Welcome to the final act, the death-defying trapeze redemption arc." I ripped the mic out of the wall. Too late. Everyone was chanting, "Redemption arc! Redemption arc!" And Loopy heard them. He rolled over, looked up, smiled, then passed out cold. Kazzam said, "It's fine. That's just the subconscious entering cocoon mode." I said, "That's a concussion, Kazzam." The tent was buzzing, the crowd was thrilled, and I was slowly planning my exit strategy involving a fake name, a moving van, and a remote island with no internet. Because now the burnout had turned into a public spectacle, a meta circus within a circus. And the worst part? The audience loved it.
After the chaos, after the crash, after the crowd's standing ovation for what was essentially a mental breakdown in midair, there was quiet. Loopy was still out cold. Kazzam insisted he was deep in healing stasis, which I'm 80% sure he got from a Star Trek episode and 20% sure he read on a cereal box. Gorka sat beside Loopy's foam pit crash site like a bodyguard, arms crossed, daring anyone to encourage artistic suffering within a 5-meter radius. And me? I stood in the center of the ring, breathing in the smell of sweat, glitter, and misplaced optimism, thinking, maybe we're past the worst of it. Spoiler, we were not. But first, the fake miracle. After the chaos, after the crash, after the crowd standing ovation for what was essentially a mental breakdown in midair, there was quiet. Loopy was still out cold. Kazzam insisted he was deep in healing stasis, which I'm 80% sure he got from a Star Trek episode and 20% sure he read on a cereal box. Gorka sat beside Loopy's foam pit crash site like a bodyguard, arms crossed, daring anyone to encourage artistic suffering within a 5-meter radius. And me? I stood in the center of the ring, breathing in the smell of sweat, glitter, and misplaced optimism, thinking, maybe we're past the worst of it. Spoiler, we were not. But first, the fake miracle. After a few minutes after the crash, Loopy stirred, blinked, sat up slowly as if emerging from a dream about failure and public humiliation, wrapped in applause. I ran over. I expected confusion, tears, regret. Instead, he smiled. That's when I should have panicked. He looked around like he'd just survived a spiritual boot camp and said, "Gribbs, I get it now.
I asked, get what? He said, the fall isn't the enemy, it's the reset. Kazzam actually gasped like he just heard a fortune cookie confirm his worldview. He stood up, wobbled slightly, then declared loud enough for the retirees in row 3 to hear, I'm no longer afraid. And the crowd, who had no idea what they were witnessing, cheered like it was the Olympics. Even Gorka nodded with something disturbingly close to pride. I wasn't so sure. Because when someone has a complete psychological spiral, concusses themselves in front of an audience, and wakes up preaching life lessons, that's not healing, that's denial with good posture. Still, I let myself believe. For 5 minutes, everything looked fine. Loopy walked without limping, he drank water, he said thank you, he asked where his foam hat was. All signs pointed to recovery or at least temporary functioning. Kazzam naturally took credit. He said, see, the subconscious journey has completed its cycle. He fell, and from that fall rose anew. Loopy nodded solemnly like a man who just read the back of a self-help book and mistook it for a life philosophy. Then he said, I want to do the full routine again tonight. I froze. Gorka raised an eyebrow. Kazzam beamed like a cult leader mid-recruitment. I said, maybe we wait a day, or a year, just to be sure. Loopy shook his head. No, I have to reclaim it. The act, the moment, the bar. I glanced at the bar, still crooked from the last disaster. I tried logic. Your brain might still be bruised. He said, exactly. This time I'll swing with truth. Kazzam whispered, he's transcending. Gorka muttered, he's about to fracture something else. And yet, he was so calm. No shaking, no overbreathing, no motivational chanting. It looked like healing, sounded like healing, smelled slightly like foam and sweat, but emotionally, hope. So I did what any idiot ringmaster running on fumes and denial would do. I said, yes, I greenlit the act. Kazzam immediately offered to enchant the trapeze for symbolic resonance. I said no. Gorka agreed. Instead, we kept it simple. One bar, one platform, one Loopy. No music, no lights, just him. He climbed, took a breath, and for a moment, an actual, real, genuine moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. He launched, he flew, he caught the bar. Perfect form, controlled swing, smooth rotation. The seniors lost their minds. Even Gorka clapped. Even I smiled. Kazzam whispered something about ascension through air. Loopy landed the dismount perfectly, raised his arms, took a bow, and then he turned to me and said, okay, again, but this time with fire.
So, there I was, blinking in disbelief while my freshly concussed trapeze artist looked me dead in the eye and said, again, but this time with fire. I did what any responsible manager would do. I screamed, nope, loudly, repeatedly, in several different emotional tones. But Loopy was already climbing the ladder again, eyes blazing with a clarity that only comes after a near-death experience and just before another one. And Kazzam, he clapped. He actually clapped and pulled out a tiny, grimy vial of what he called fire essence. Let me be clear. Anything in a bottle that looks like it was brewed in a bathroom and labeled in cursive should never go near a human, ever. He said, 1 drop on the bar and it'll ignite symbolically. I said, 1 drop and I'm suing you symbolically. Gorka, to her credit, had already moved toward the ladder like she was about to physically drag Loopy down by his ankle. But he reached the top before she could grab him. He shouted, don't worry, this is part of the arc. Arc. He meant story arc, narrative resolution, theatrical closure. He thought this was a redemption plotline, and in that moment, I realized the real problem. Loopy didn't want to recover. He wanted the comeback story. He didn't want rest, he wanted applause. And burnout recovery doesn't work like that. Still, before I could finish having that epiphany, he jumped. With the fire bar. Kazzam had, in fact, applied the symbolic drop, which apparently meant the thing was now smoldering like an angry toaster. Loopy flew toward it, midair, arms extended, ready to grasp a metaphor wrapped in bad decision-making. And he missed.
Again. But this time, instead of crashing, something completely idiotic happened. Rorzy caught him. That's right, the lion. The ancient grumpy doesn't give a damn lion who'd been lurking near the popcorn stand all afternoon, avoiding everyone. At the exact moment Loopy started falling, Rorzy lumbered into the ring, let out a roar, and patted directly under the drop zone. Loopy landed on his back. Perfectly. No injuries, just confusion, and a faint smell of singed glitter from the half-burnt bar dropping behind him. Everyone froze. No one breathed. Then Rorzy grunted, like he was tired of the drama, and casually walked Loopy to the edge of the ring like an Uber for emotional instability. Loopy slid off his back, looked around, dazed, and said, "Did the lion just rescue me?" Yes. Yes, he did. And the entire tent burst into the loudest applause we've had since the elephant accidentally won a dance competition. Loopy blinked, sighed, then said, "Maybe I don't need to fly today. Thank God." He collapsed onto the ground, flat on his back, breathing like someone who finally stopped sprinting after a finish line that didn't exist. I turned to Kazzam. He was holding the now empty fire vial upside down and whispering, "Did I summon the lion?" I said, "No, you are not allowed to summon anything." Rosie growled in agreement. Kazzam nodded like the universe had spoken directly through feline disapproval. Gorka, meanwhile, crossed her arms and muttered, "I still think he should have caught the bar, but whatever." And me? I just sat down in the center of the ring. Right there, on the floor, surrounded by scorched rope, confused retirees, and a lion with better instincts than any of us. Because somehow, in the dumbest way possible, everything resolved itself. Not with therapy, not with hypnotherapy, not with motivational speeches, foam pits, or PowerPoints, but with a lion who couldn't stand the noise anymore and decided to physically end the plot. And maybe that's the most honest metaphor of all. Burnout doesn't get cured with spectacle. It ends when someone or something bigger than you says, "Enough," and carries your exhausted ass off stage.
So that's how it ended. Not with healing, not with closure, with a lion. A lion that apparently has a better grasp of emotional burnout than the rest of us combined. Loopy's fine, physically. He's been sleeping in a hammock near the high rig, muttering things like "the arc is complete" and "the lion is my spirit guide," which honestly is a big upgrade from whispering motivational slogans at crash mats. Kazzam has started marketing his advanced hypno burnout release method as a limited edition workshop. I found a flyer in the bathroom that literally says, "Heal through a lesion, no license, no limits." I confiscated the flyers. Then he printed more. I confiscated his printer. He's now using the cotton candy machine as a laminator. Gorka's still Gorka. She's added burnout prevention boot camp to her morning routine. It involves dragging people out of bed with a whistle and yelling, "Motivation is a muscle." I've been hiding behind the ticket booth all week. As for me, I'm tired. Not I didn't sleep tired, existentially tired.
Like if someone dropped one more flaming metaphor on my tent, I just sit under it and call it performance art. Because here's the thing no one tells you about managing a circus full of emotionally unstable creatives and one ethically gray magician. It never ends. There's always another crisis, another comeback, another spectacular implosion disguised as entertainment. And the audience? They love it. They clap, they film, they post about how raw and honest it all felt. Meanwhile, I'm backstage duct taping egos together and praying the lion doesn't unionize. But hey, at least Loopy's not trying to launch himself into symbolic fire anymore. Progress, right? Right? Maybe? God, I need a nap. This week's moral: burnout isn't fixed with affirmations or fire tricks or magical nonsense you downloaded from the sketchy side of YouTube. It's fixed when someone stops. Just stops, sits down, and lets the lion walk them out. Sometimes recovery looks like being carried off stage by a tired cat who's seen too much. And sometimes that lion is your coworker, or your therapist, or your manager who's definitely not paid enough to be here. And sometimes that lion is you,
dragging your own flaming body away from one more performance you shouldn't have said yes to. Anyway, I'm off to put out another metaphorical fire, because apparently Blimpo tried to help the healing process by hot gluing scented candles around the fuse box. And that's why next week's episode is titled, "You Won't Believe What My Clown Did with a Candle and a Fire Extinguisher." See you there. Or don't. Honestly, go rest. I'll still be here, running this therapy session with popcorn.